Welcome to the RSP Cast. I'm Matt Waldman with the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Today's episode is a solo cast on the 2025 quarterback class. It's a good group of prospects worthy of your attention as an NFL fan, a Dynasty GM, and in a few cases, as a fantasy GM in redraft and best ball formats. Now I'm going to discuss one or two prevailing thoughts I have about the 12 quarterbacks that will be featured in the 2025 Rookie Scouting Portfolio pre-draft publication, which is available for pre-order at www.mattwaldman.com. It's going to be available for April 1 download, maybe a little earlier. We'll see. It is the night of the 30th right now, and I have finished editing everything thanks to just a great team of editors that, I post at the front, their names at the front. You guys know who you are. You guys make this month a lot easier. I can definitely say that. I really appreciate it. Let's congratulate last week's contest winners, Dave Stickley and Pontus Anderson, for their early response and correct answers to last week's Sleeper RB. And that answer was Mario Anderson of Memphis. Dave Stickley, Pontus Anderson. Thanks again, guys. I'm going to have you guys set up so that you'll receive an email when you can download the RSP. And if you don't get that email on April 1st, just email me and I'll get with you and get that straightened out within the first 24 hours. And that's the same for any of y'all. If you have any issues or questions, just email me. I'll get to you within 24. All right. Feel it or fuck it won't be airing this week. Bob's away. And as you can see, I'm wrapping up the 2025 RSP. So if you haven't purchased the RSP in the past, it's a PDF draft guide covering at least 150 prospects at the offensive skill positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. We're going to have over 160 this year. And it's been available for download every April 1 since 2006. Yep, 20 years this year. 20 years. And for over a decade of that time, I've delivered a post-draft guide 1 week after the NFL draft, and that's part of this subscription price of $21.95. It's how I make my living. If you like these podcasts, the YouTube channel, Twitter, Blue Sky content, all the work is just simply me sharing a small amount of the background research I do for this publication. As most of you know, I go deep with the RSP, and it helps you go deep with your knowledge so you can go deep on your league mates. I was in sales a long time ago, but what I'm sharing is low on frills, and I try to make it huge on substance. New readers are always pleasantly shocked with what they get, and I'll share more detail about the RSP later in the podcast. This is a C through W show on quarterbacks. It'll be like last year's solo casts on the other positions, where I'll be sharing 1 to 2 things about these quarterbacks that I find notable and in alphabetical order of the quarterback first name. These thoughts will fall into categories of praise, criticism, lingering questions, or just broader thoughts about the position as a whole. Again, these are far from complete scouting reports. If you want the full deal, $21.95, mattwaldman.com. It'll get you that. And if you're like most who give me feedback about the price, you're going to feel like you're underpaying. And I am selling you, but I'm telling you the truth. This quarterback class has a lot of buzz as a group that's going to earn some early round draft capital. And so in that sense, it's a good class. But there are questions about how much it's deserved when comparing it to 2024's crew that I think was a truly good class. Caleb Williams, Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and J.J. McCarthy. Now, the top of this class isn't as strong as last year's, but this class overall has depth. I think there's 12 quarterbacks that I studied in this class that have NFL caliber ability. And I'm going to include a 13th unofficially, and that's former Iowa State quarterback Hunter Dekkers, who I watched, but I didn't chart for the publication and didn't include a scouting report. I might talk about him a little bit here, if he gets drafted or has a prominent free agent opportunity with the team, I'll talk about him more in the post-draft. So if you're a fantasy GM, there's no Caleb Williams-like prospect in this class. Not one who's going to withstand that onslaught of being on an awful team that just gives you horrific organizational decisions that can derail the play calling, execution, and coaching that we saw with Chicago last year. But there are 8 options whose scores give them at least realistic potential to become high-end contributors like journeyman backups who get time on the field, or NFL starters as they finish their rookie deals. And considering that almost a coin flip of a hit rate exists for first-round prospects, and that 2 to 4 of these options out of the 8 will be first-round picks, I'd say expecting 1 to 2 of these 8 options to actually hit is probably realistic. Still, I tend to recommend GMs in Dynasty leagues to invest in rookie receivers and running backs. Build a surplus of talent, and then leverage that surplus for a proven quarterback. I believe that's the case this year in standard Dynasty formats. If you want to take a quarterback, I think there are 2 potential bargains I recommend. You'll have to read the RSP to find out who they are. In Superflex formats, I think there are 2 to 3 worth considering in the second half of the first round or early half of the second round, and maybe 1 to 2 more in the third or fourth round, who I'd probably rather have and focus more on running back and wide receiver and maybe tight end, depending on the scoring system in the first round. So if you're tearing down your team to the studs and rebuilding, you're in a startup, or your team's in that no man's land of being too good for a top 3 overall pick, but not good enough to be a playoff contender, stockpiling quarterback talent is often a viable strategy, but I'm a little reluctant about using this approach in 2025. I think you'd probably be better off spending that capital on running backs and wide receivers this year. Before we get into this class, it should be stated annually that when considering the physical, the technical, conceptual, intuitive, and emotional facets of the quarterback position, it's the most demanding role on a playing field in sport. And evaluating this position is difficult. And I've had my share of misses. I mean, Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert stand out as far as probably the most recent misses of the past 20 years at this point. Now, I have been known for taking stands that were ahead of the curve, too. Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, last year Bo Nix, and even less regarded prospects like Brock Purdy, while also raising significant doubts about players like Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Drew Lock, Zach Wilson, and even early cautioning about the development timeline that Baker Mayfield might need and what kind of upside he had. I think Baker's done a good job at this point of showing that he's reaching that, his ceiling here. Now, I'm sharing these hits and misses not to brag, but just to set up some points about quarterback evaluation that's important for scouting every class, especially one of the most important players in this class, or important positions in this class. And the box score stats aren't always contextually sound data. Confidence is a trackable trait with quarterbacking. That's right. Confidence is a trackable trait with quarterbacking. And age analysis, it's a nice idea, but the application itself is troublesome. So let's begin with the first point. Box score stats aren't always contextually sound data. I originally brought this up with Baker Mayfield during his Senior Bowl, and I got some pushback from the media analytics community. They loved Mayfield for his completion percentage, and I noted that accuracy is a deceptive category because completion percentage fails to show the following things. It doesn't show how precise the pass placement is relative to the route break and the position of the coverage. It doesn't show whether the receiver was responsible for a bad outcome despite a good decision and execution by the quarterback, and whether the quarterback executed the decision with the appropriate speed of confidence. That you don't really get to judge that either. So more about that speed of confidence thing in a minute. Now, Mayfield had a high completion percentage, but his placement often failed to be pinpoint by pro standards, which he got away with at Oklahoma because of the way most college defenses had to play that offense. And Mayfield also was often late with delivering targets that should have been completed if he processed the game with that decisive confidence of an NFL starter. Now, the rookie scouting portfolio has a charting methodology, And what I love about charting quarterbacks is that it contextualizes the degree of accuracy that completion percentage doesn't come close to doing. So for every game I chart, I'm categorizing every throw based on situation, platform, target distance, target zone, accuracy type, and if that has the appropriate velocity needed. This includes things like scripted and unscripted situations, throwing on and off platform, throwing from a stance or on the move, passes delivered to the same side of the field or to the opposite hash, the presence and absence of pressure, and targets against man and zone coverage. So combinations of these criteria are matched with the zones and distance ranges of the field, and those distances are something that I measure from the quarterback's throwing point to the receiver. Not the line of scrimmage, but the quarterback's throwing point to the receiver making the catch. I have a short range of 0 to 14 yards, an intermediate range of 15 to 28, vertical of 29 to 42, and deep range of distances greater than 42 yards. And the zones I demarcate as the short sideline, the short flat, the short middle of the field, and then you have the intermediate range in the sideline, flat, and middle of the field. Vertical, same thing with deep. The percentage thresholds that I use to grade accuracy in the RSP come from next-gen stats for most of the criteria that's mentioned above. So, for instance, I look at what's the average percentage of a starting quarterback, his completion percentage on short throws to the sideline, or deep throws to the opposite side of the field, or vertical throws under pressure, and I have those thresholds. And so I'm looking to see whether the quarterbacks, their throws, the percentage of their throws that are pinpoint meet that standard. Now, I'm seeking pinpoint accuracy that reaches the receiver exactly where the target should arrive based on the route and based on the receiver's position on the field, his primary coverage, and the secondary coverage of the position of the defense. So I take all these things into account as a reasonable percentage of what I would call general accuracy, which is simply placing the ball in an area where a receiver has a reasonable chance to catch the football. So a quarterback doesn't have to display pinpoint accuracy with every attempt at his top range to earn a spot in a certain accuracy tier. But at the same time, there has to be enough throws that illustrate that he has pinpoint accuracy and that the effort's replicable as he devotes extra work to his game. So I'm using specific percentage thresholds for accuracy in the accuracy grades. And while the charting data has a small sample size, and really regardless of what anyone tries to tell you in the public sphere, all charting data has a small sample size. It's just really more important than anything to contextualize the data as much as possible. So it means that the use of this charting data to create thresholds is a work in progress. And when I see fit to use additional context to grade a player a tier higher or lower than the data, I often do so. When comparing the use of these thresholds in the way that I've evaluated accuracy in the past, the differences aren't massive, but I have found that the data is particularly useful for clarifying which tier where I place a specific performance. And in the case of a player like, say, Dak Prescott a while back, he may have had multiple accuracy grades on the cusp of higher tiers, and that could have made a discernible difference for me in terms of where I would have graded him. And this is definitely more valuable, this whole process, even though you may have just kind of your eyes glazed over as you heard all this. It's definitely more valuable than box score accuracy. Mayfield and Lamar Jackson were overvalued and undervalued respectively based on box score accuracy. In contrast to my lower grade for Mayfield, Jackson was more accurate than his box score data would have led you to believe because of the number of drop passes from his receiving core. People were questioning his viability as a quarterback when, if they could see charting on a regular basis, they would have known the question of his positional viability was really a ridiculous notion. This analysis has given me the confidence to stand firm with insights that have gone against the grain, but have proven out over time. You can include Drew Lock and Zach Wilson as recent examples rooted in this charting methodology. The same with Brock Purdy. Now, we may see another Mayfield Jackson dynamic with, projected first-round picks in the future. Certainly, I thought that was the way with Michael Penix and maybe Drake May. So I think that big draft sometimes has players wrong for months because of the lack of contextual charting. There were a lot of people who I think downgraded Bo Nix in the media as well because he was older. So was Michael Penix. That was something they banged on with these guys. And for me, prospect age is a little like that ill-advised wide receiver model from, say, a decade ago, where some of the analytics consultants for the Eagles decided it was a bright idea to filter out all the prospects who weren't at least 6'2" and 210 pounds. And while there's value to creating these filters after you've evaluated every player for their skills, these models are susceptible to ham-handed applications, and age can be one of those things that people can get ham-handed with. Because, again, the theory that an older player should be better right now because he has more experience with identifying and executing on the field than younger players, that's a good theory. The game does often slow down for older players when they earn that playing experience. But in practice, of how to use that theory when applying it to scouting can be more ham-handed than football personnel evaluators at, the all-you-eat pig fest at the Saucy Q down the street from the Senior Bowl can actually handle. I mean, to begin with, how one creates a scoring system around age as a variable without generating a high degree of variation from how it's applied from player to player, that's going to be rife with problems. And then the real root issue is that what's embedded in the valid idea that the game slows down for players as they age and earn playing experience. The idea that he'll get better with experience is the same rationalization we hear annually about first-round quarterbacks who wash out of the league. The idea has merit, but without identifying at least the following about prospects, the idea is useless. You got to identify which skills actually get better with experience, both positive and negative experiences. Can they get better with both types? Can the skills, which skills need more positive experiences for them to grow than negative experiences? And which skills don't usually improve if the player hasn't already mastered them before they've entered the pros? So, again, age is a sloppy coat of white paint without examining the surface where it's supposed to go. It's like saying if you eat better, you reduce your chances of contracting cancer. That's great, but with millions of dollars at stake, do you want your football organization to increase their chances of the equivalent of landing on the moon and hoping it happens, or do you want precise calculations? So this is why raw and inexperienced are vague terms that can mean too many things and lead you down the wrong path. You could see how people would say, well, Drake May and J.J. McCarthy, their field reading wouldn't just get better with experience. And then Penix or Bo Nix experience aren't necessarily why they have more consistent skills with reading the field. So synonymous doesn't always mean exactly the same. It can mean similar, but important differences and nuance. So, for example, if we're defining raw as inexperienced, perhaps in the same way that the Queen's Gambit's Beth Harmon was inexperienced playing tournaments, then that type of rawness has, a lot of advanced skills, but lacking performance experience on a big stage. But if you're defining raw as technically and conceptually unskilled, like, say, Malik Willis when he came into the league, you're talking about something really different. So to begin with, your quarterback list, and you look at Bo Nix, they thought he was old for a prospect. They were knocking on him for his experience. And, quarterbacks, I've seen quarterbacks much older with more experience in the NFL never show the self-awareness that Nix has shown. And he already possessed a good feel for situations where he came where he could make off-platform or cross-body throws. He wasn't getting too invested in plays at Auburn or Oregon. He got rid of the ball fast when he broke the pocket. He could throw the ball away on schemed plays rather than trying to force him to a receiver. And that's something that a lot of young quarterbacks do too often. So people believe experience and age leads to self-awareness, and it can be a factor, but it's not the primary reason people become self-aware. They have to get skills and show the desire to become self-aware. And Nix read the field much better than credited. He accounted for leverage of defenders with target decisions and his placement. He's been a willing tight window thrower. He knows how to protect his receivers. He made decisions and delivered targets with these skills at both schools he was at, though I would say Auburn's receivers didn't do him many favors. So Nix also showed small manipulative touches. He positioned his frame after drops well, play fakes, pump fakes, punctuated the ability to hold defenders with his eyes. He wasn't the most exciting prospect on that superficial level that fans were looking at on highlights, but if you watch him deliver, and we watched him all last year, he delivered the 8th best season for any quarterback in 2024 and had one of the 12 best rookie seasons in the history of the game. So Bo Nix, good example of, what people think sometimes can, you got to go a little deeper sometimes with this stuff. So let's get to the thoughts on the 2025 class of quarterbacks. We're going to start with Cam Ward of Miami. Now, as good as Ward can be off script, he's got to tighten up his drop footwork, his setups into his stance to where he's going to be throwing, and his releases. Now, most of the work that's necessary is actually with his lower body. Some teams are going to look at Ward's arm mechanics and going to believe that requires the most tinkering because he's got that long whip-like winding motion, very elongated motion. But I would caution coaches to be careful about messing with that. Ward's whip-like motion is quick. It generates velocity. And his accuracy issues don't have to do with that. They have more to do with his feet than his arm. Ward has the arm talent to start in the NFL right now. He can make most, if not all, of the throws from the pocket that NFL coaches want in their offense and use a variety of throwing platforms to do it. Ward manipulates defenders. He's got well-executed ball fakes in the play-action game, good pump fakes in and outside the pocket. And I think the play-action game is where Ward exhibited the most cohesive and fluid aspects of drop footwork. But when dropping from pistol and shotgun, Ward's footwork, whether it was at Washington State or Miami, his footwork's fragmented. And I mean, it's just not fluid stop and go and like pacing and fluidity of steps. It doesn't look good. But at the same time, it hasn't killed his timing thus far. But if you look at the types of plays he runs, I would say he's going to have to get better. Because when he transitions to the NFL, he's going to have to show he's going to show cleaner, more organized, and fluid drop footwork in game action. Especially this summer. It's going to be a compelling reason probably to keep Ward on the bench and give him time to develop the technique that'll be the foundation for everything he does as a decision maker and thrower in an NFL passing game. Because there's going to be a wider display of timing passes than what maybe you're going to see from his RPO screen 4 verticals game that was a big part of what he did in the past 2 schools. Now, last year, Caleb Williams struggled for half the season with the Bears because his drop footwork was among the problems with this offense. There were plays where the Bears' former offensive coordinator didn't have prescribed footwork for the drop, and Williams' timing was off with his receivers. And Williams had better drop footwork coming out of school than Cam Ward's footwork appears to be at this point. So when coverage is tight, as it can be in the NFL, and pressure reaches the pocket earlier, a quarterback must be efficient and precise. And sloppy footwork doesn't create a foundation for efficient and precise play. Now Ward's decision-making's got high points. From a clean pocket, like he can split defenders with downfield throws, with good reads of leverage. He can deliver with touch, velocity, throw the moon ball in the deep game so his receivers can win targets with their athletic ability. It's all there. He's often aware of defenders in the periphery of his intended targets and knows when that defender is in too good of a position to target the route. And Ward has but at the same time, Ward has lapses with his awareness, and unfortunately, it happens most often in the most compressed region of the field where the mistakes have more gravity, and that's the red zone. Ward's ability to buy time, layer targets over the defense, split coverage, and notice peripheral defenders raises his confidence in his ability to bleed every bit of opportunity from a play, but when he exhausts his options, he's got to throw the ball away in the red zone. He will do it in other areas of the field. Dylan Gabriel. Gabriel finds the hole. He's out of Oregon by way of OU. And Gabriel finds the hole in cover 3 coverage downfield. He can layer the ball over shallow and intermediate coverage to the receiver breaking behind it. He delivers the ball with enough placement so that the receiver can make back shoulder catches rather than taking hits to the chest from an oncoming safety. He's also good at feeling blindside edge pressure. You can get within a step or two of him, and he'll roll past blindside and frontside edge pressure to the open flat. Unfortunately, though, he's not this good with every form of pressure. Gabriel's reactive to edge pressure when it's coming hot and fast from a secondary defender or a linebacker, like a safety, corner, or linebacker. And this quick edge pressure disrupts the flow and pace he should take to maneuver it intelligently. Now, other than that, Gabriel can work through 2 to 3 reads. He can identify pressure compromising the pocket, and he can buy time away from the pocket to find an open option or run. He just misses solutions for maneuvering within the pocket when there are 2 points of pressure. 1 point of pressure, he's fine. 2 points, he can roll into the same side of the field where nothing had come open earlier and cuts off the other side of the field where receivers were running open. And so he can kind of self-destruct there and not be able to access open players because of the 2 points of pressure. He's reactive to edge pressure, and so that first reaction is to retreat or bolt the pocket to the outside rather than climbing the pocket. And he's missed opportunities to climb and at least target a check down when he gets reactive to this pressure, and he's taken sacks in the black zone because of this reactive nature to edge pressure. Now, he has moments where he's comfortable in the pocket against bookend edge pressure. He'll incrementally climb. He'll find the open dig route against zone when there's interior pressure but not arriving directly in his face. Gabriel sidesteps the pressure in the pocket, resets, and delivers to a deep downfield target against cover 0. He can maneuver too close to his blocker sometimes when he's avoiding pressure in the pocket, and he can get too close to defenders where there's no need for him to move in that direction, and he ends up generating pressure that wasn't there. Now, on the other hand, Gabriel can sidestep and climb pressure on top of him in a tight pocket and find the check down. So if Gabriel can kind of parse out the issues that accompany his strengths in the pocket, he could become a compelling backup. He's got that really game competitive nature about him and creative skills. And I think that with some work, he could transcend his current value where I have him. So I think overall, he's a fascinating player. He's got some zone targets between defenders where he just doesn't have the confidence yet, though, to pull the trigger when the coverage is favorable. And the targets between defenders he anticipates that are unfavorable for the quarterback, he's got to improve his leverage reads. He's making the wrong throws given the situations that he's seen with the leverage reads. So he's got to get more confident. This underscores an important point about quarterbacking. Confidence is vital and a trackable trait with quarterbacking. If I could pinpoint an area where a lot of teams miss with their evaluation of quarterbacks, it's undervaluing a passer's confidence. And this sounds like an intangible, but it's not when you define the term as confidence to close the gap between identification to action. The whiteboard and recall of plays and coverages are identification. That's the identification part of it. Teams annually praise top prospects for their identification in the whiteboard setting, and often they feel like it's going to translate to the field. But none of that identification is any good on the field if the confidence to act immediately upon recognition isn't there. So waiting for further confirmation of what's immediately seen rather than acting on what's immediately seen plagues a lot of these early round passers who teams annually praise for talking about the game like they're coaches before the draft. That's what we heard about Kenny Pickett and Desmond Ridder all the way back to Alex Smith, okay, is that, they may see the leverage, and you can see that they see it, but then you watch them pat the ball or take an extra hitch or 2 or 3 when their feet were in position to just let the ball rip. And because they didn't let it rip, the ball comes out late, or they end up not being able to let it rip, and now they got to create in the pocket, and they take sacks, or have to throw the ball away, or have to check down, and they missed a golden opportunity for a big play. That's the difference between identifying well, but not being able to react with confidence, and the difference between, say, Brett Favre, Joe Burrow, Brock Purdy, Patrick Mahomes, who the moment they see it, the ball comes out. Tom Brady. All right, so let's talk about Jalen Milro. Milro's the best pocket player in this class. He's got Lamar Jackson's quiet feet, and that's that ability to make subtle moves so that he can continue manipulating defenders and still be in a position to throw the ball in the pocket. He can move in the pocket with controlled footwork and movement to keep the eyes downfield and throw. There are guys with loud footwork. Michael Vick and Kyler Murray often have very loud footwork. It's flashy, but it doesn't, their eyes go down. They make dynamic movements where they've got to reset. Sometimes they get outside leverage of where their blockers were working effectively against defenders, and they end up creating more pressure. That's what loud footwork does. But Milro has quiet footwork, and he has just as much mobility as Vick and Murray. So Milro is also one of the best at this class at manipulating defenders. He targets linebackers and safeties in the middle of the field, and it's not that weak sauce of holding the safety during the initial drop that we hear year after year after year. Look at him in that 7-step drop. Hold the safety during the first 3, and then at the top of his drop, he pivots to the opposite boundary and throws the ball in rhythm. Every quarterback who's going to be an NFL prospect can do that. Almost every single one. And it's the most basic manipulative tool. Okay? No, Milro can manipulate linebackers and nickelbacks in the middle of the field within 10 to 15 yards of the line of scrimmage against a blitz. So Milro's isn't doing this during the initial drop. He's doing it later in the play when he knows he's going to have a defensive tackle or linebacker in his lap if he has to wait just a half a beat too long to pull the trigger. And this isn't early career Michael Vick or Kyler Murray. Those guys turn their backs or drop their eyes to pressure early on because they're reacting within, a crazy cool but crazy inefficient type of way. And it forces the entire offense to adjust to them when it's mostly unnecessary. No, see, Milro is an efficient mover who can climb, spin, sidestep, flush, and find an open option without killing the original protection of his linemen or the routes of his teammates. Milro's release isn't a whip-like motion that begins at the quarterback's toenail, like, say, Cam Ward. God bless Ward. It works for him. But Milro has the most compact release in his class, and perhaps several classes. I've had to go back to Dan Marino's tape just to see if I saw any notable differences between the compactness of their releases. Now, Milro looks like a mythical hero throwing a javelin or a lightning bolt. His drop game sets him up well for all the work I just mentioned above as a decision maker and a pocket mover. The thing that Milro has to work on is his touch. It's the one thing missing from his throwing arsenal. He just doesn't get enough air under targets to deliver high-arcing passes that drop straight down into receivers, and this hurts his accuracy with corner fades, with the honey hole shots between the safety and corner and cover two, and also when throwing receivers open at the boundary. Milro is prone to overshooting these targets. Okay, Jackson Dart. Dart's accuracy wanes somewhere between 25 to 30 yards. Anything over that, and it's just scattershot accuracy. He's overthrowing balls, he's underthrowing balls, he's behind receivers, he's ahead of the target, and these are like wide open targets. And the scary part for me is that Dart's setup, his stance, and his release really lack any significant flaws beyond that his feet need to be undisturbed and narrower to deliver with accuracy in that deeper range of the field, 30 to 45 yards. And so when he's forced to maneuver from pressure, his feet can get too wide, and it leads to Dart delivering inaccurate throws. So from this standpoint, Dart's going to have to develop a strong skill for climbing the pocket where his footwork is precise. And this could give him a chance to overcome the specific symptom of his inaccuracies downfield. Now, I'm not a quarterback coach. I've submitted work to him, so there could be subtler issues that hurt Dart's downfield accuracy elsewhere. But from my perspective, Dart's accuracy relative to his mechanics reminds me a little bit of like Jake Locker, a player who had decent mechanics but couldn't deliver the ball with enough accuracy to really thrive in the NFL. Now, Dart should be a good match, or it would be good for Dart if he's matched with a West Coast offense or scheme with a lot of pistol and shotgun and with moving pockets off play action and misdirection throwbacks. And if he's forced to start early in that system, which I would say is inadvisable, but he has enough surrounding talent to keep him on schedule, maybe Dart can have enough success to buy time to develop a vertical game so that he's not so scattershot. And that's the ideal outcome for him. I think it's, though, somewhat unlikely. But there are things working in Dart's favor that could limit his need to throw downfield often. I think he works through 2 to 3 reads during a play pretty well. He legitimately sees what's in front of him with each side of his progressions, and he can work from sideline to sideline before checking the ball to the outlet. And he's done so before pressure arrives in the pocket. He's good at going through 2 to 3 reads before pressure breaks down a pocket, and he identifies pre-snap pressure, inside and outside pressure, and he responds effectively to interior pressure and edge pressure. He's also pretty effective against some forms of pressure where there are multiple players arriving at the same time from different points of the pocket. Dart illustrates wise game management in the red zone, and when there's a highly scripted play that doesn't have the post-snap numbers advantage with the defense, Dart doesn't target the receiver, and he'll eat the ball to keep the team in field goal position. So that's wise. He also protects his receivers in the short and intermediate game with the placement of throws away from the closest defender. He'll throw the ball away when pressure pins him to the boundary, and he runs out of open options. So there's some concepts and skills here with Dart's game. There's just some areas with his game that are going to need some work, and if it may be tough for him to get better at it. Curtis Rourke of Indiana by way of Ohio. Rourke moves well in the pocket. He has good downfield accuracy. He doesn't look like a top-end athlete as a scrambler, but he does possess a feel for pursuit and often breaks the pocket, buys time, and if needed, moves the chains with his legs. He's an accurate thrower, and thanks to that clean footwork and compact and efficient release mechanics, that's going to be consistent for him. He holds the middle of the field defenders to one side of the field so he can buy room to target a route breaking from the opposite side of the field. And he does this all really well within the rhythm of his dropbacks and the routes. This is a good timing passer. He can sell the out with a good long look to the cornerback so he can deliver the corner route breaking behind that defender in cover 2. Rourke sets up screens with a look to the wide route or the swing route from the back to the right, and then come back to a smoke screen to the receiver coming from the left or the middle of the field. He's a confident quarterback when it comes to targeting receivers in tight windows of coverage, and he's got the placement to do it. I'd say the upper range of his accuracy is 40 to 45 yards downfield last year. But I've seen a deeper range from Rourke in Ohio as well. Rourke's particularly skilled with placement in the vertical passing game and accounting for the peripheral defender who may be peeling off his spot or another receiver to assist with the coverage of the targeted route. And Rourke can work through multiple reads. He can sidestep pressure. He resets and delivers the ball. So if the receiver obeys the placement, the receiver can split defenders in coverage for additional yardage because of the placement. So after surveying, say, 2 to 3 reads across the field, high or low, Rourke has a good pocket clock and management skills to slide outside the pocket and hit his check down on the move. And when he's forced to sidestep pressure or slide outside the pocket after those first 2 reads, he throws the ball away. So he's a good manager. He's a smart quarterback. He's got technical skills, promising conceptual knowledge that translates to the field. And he's shown just a little bit of toughness. I'm being facetious. He opted for thumb surgery last year so he could only miss 1 game this year after breaking it. Now, what few knew is, while they're thinking about the thumb, what few knew was that Rourke is actually tougher than a box of ring-shank nails. I mean, at least not until the first week of January did the public know that Rourke played the entire 2024 season with an ACL tear to the same knee he injured in 2022. It's a guy who led them to a playoff game, and he played some good Big Ten teams, and he played on a torn ACL that he suffered in August. You wouldn't have known he was playing through this type of injury. He had a small brace on, but go back and reread everything. Well, go back and listen to everything I just said, and then you can reread it in the RSP. This is a compelling prospect. All right, next, Kyle McCord. But first, listen, the rookie scouting portfolio, pre-draft, post-draft, publications the goods. For $21.95, you get the most comprehensive look at skill positions of quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end that are available to the general public. What you get for download on April 1st, it's a PDF. It's fully bookmarked, and it contains information that my subscribers have learned is evergreen and even more valuable than the post-draft that's usually even high demand by newer customers. Rankings are in cheat sheet and prose formats. You get detailed profiles breaking down all the criteria I use to scout each position. I guide you through my defined and weighted criteria, so you kind of get an entertaining understanding of why my evaluation process is the way it is and how the pieces make the whole of each scouting report. So you can kind of break down and compare players in each of those areas, and you can kind of see that all in one area, and what's important about those areas. And then you can go back and look at the whole scouting reports as well. There's analysis with decent recent draft trends at each position and what I think is changing in the league with how the NFL assesses the positions. There's range of stylistic comparisons for each prospect. A minimum of 150 prospects are profiled pre-draft. I've done over 160 this year. Rankings from my past 3 years of classes are updated multiple times during the season because you get a newsletter with this. And then there's a post-draft guide, and as part of that purchase, it's available no later than a week after the draft. And it delivers great fantasy analysis rooted in the football scouting that I did in the pre-draft publication. You're going to get ADP tracking from multiple leagues. You're going to get updated rankings and a tiered cheat sheet that's like 2 pages long with sweet spot values between my valuation of the player and his post-draft ADP. What does that mean? It means that, for instance, when I said Nick Chubb was the best running back in that draft class, but he was drafted in the 2nd round by the Cleveland Browns, and the Browns already had an established starter in their eyes, Carlos Hyde, I believe it was at that time, and Chubb was playing special teams. But before all that, they're like, yeah, this is some sort of like, overly injured, late career Frank Gore type of prospect, and I'm saying he's every bit as good as Saquon Barkley, which he was, maybe even a little better during that time before his injury and Saquon going to the Eagles. Imagine Nick Chubb with the Eagles. That's another story. But anyway, at that time, that was the dynamic heading into rookie drafts. Even though Nick Chubb was my number 1 rated guy, I didn't tell you go just pick Nick Chubb, number 1 overall. Looked at ADP and said, okay, he's leaving boards at pick 35, 36. And then I gave you a sweet spot number to say, this is the pick number that you should be considering him at, so that you can make sure you get him, but you're not reaching too high to get him. And that's worked for guys like Cooper Kupp and Nick Chubb and A.J. Brown and Justin Jefferson and Patrick Mahomes, Bo Nix, the like, things like that. Then you get fit analysis. I talk about how they fit with their teams, and depth chart analysis that incorporates, notations about how many years left veterans have on their deals and how I see their playing time sorted out relative to the incoming rookies. And you get that monthly newsletter with scouting reports and analysis of current and future prospects. All of that for $21.95. $21.95. All of that. You're talking about well over, probably well over 1,500 pages of content. Easy to navigate content. You want the long of it, you get that. The detail you're not going to see anywhere else. And you also get the short stuff too, the quick to the point, here's how you do it, the KISS method stuff. That's there too. MattWaldman.com. You can pre-order it now. I'll email you when the RSP is ready for download, and you can click it and download it and read to your delight. And again, that'll be out April 1st, maybe a little before, we'll see. Back to Kyle McCord. Like Quinn Ewers, who I'm going to talk about in a little bit too, they're kind of at that line of demarcation with this class between having the potential of being a future starter and the potential of being a top-end backup. Now, unlike Quinn Ewers, Kyle McCord has flaws that could also force him from the league. And let's get that out of the way first, because if McCord can't overcome his tendencies to double down on bad reads, any future as an NFL starter is just going to evaporate for him. When you watch McCord, he tries to fit the ball into favorable defensive leverage. That's squatting over the receiver. What I mean is that it's unfavorable for him, but it's favorable for a defender to win the play if the quarterback targets it. It's like they have the high ground, and McCord says, "Oh yeah, I'm Anakin Skywalker. I can overcome the high ground." And that's where McCord ends up in the lava pit or the lava river, because they read his eyes, and basically McCord's yelling to Will Levis and Desmond Ridder to hold his beer. There's a lot of prospects in the NFL with arm talent. They've got chain moving ability and fundamentally sound drops, and those guys can make the same, are good at avoiding the same mistake twice, much less 3 or 4 times. But Kyle McCord wants you to watch his tape where he makes the same mistake 3 or 4 times in a game. He has that kind of belief that Jameis Winston once had about being able to make the ball disappear into the defender's chest and rematerialize behind them to the receiver's hands. And I think Winston still probably has some of that belief. If magical surrealist author Gabriel Garcia Marquez grew up in L.A., Arizona, or Texas and was a football fan, he might have written about a quarterback who had this ability. He might have loved Jameis Winston as a potential character. Now, McCord also leads players into unnecessary contact. And when it comes down to the win-lose of McCord's game, it's about learning to read and respect the leverage of defenders on receivers. Either he doesn't know how to do it, doesn't see it, or just willfully ignores it. And he's got to prove that he can do it. Max Brosmer of Minnesota. Brosmer, he's got some skills as a decision maker. He can work sideline to sideline with timely reads off play action and correctly determine the check down is the best decision. He can hold defenders to one side of the field and set up a quick pivot and then throw the middle of the field from a route breaking, say, from the backside. So he can deliver layered throws over linebackers up the seam and with pinpoint accuracy to vertical routes. And when he doesn't recognize favorable leverage that's in front of him, he just opts to throw the ball away when he had a completion. So he's going to have to get a little bit better there. Like where Brosmer doesn't recognize unfavorable leverage, sometimes, or Kyle McCord doesn't recognize unfavorable leverage. Brosmer sometimes doesn't recognize favorable leverage and throws the ball when he could have had a complete pass. Now Brosmer has to account for the peripheral defender when targeting receivers working across the field. Think the flat defender underneath an over route who can peel off the running back and drop deeper and undercut the ball. Brosmer has to account for those types of peripheral defenders. He's better at it when the defender's playing high or low of the intended target. And he can account for the peripheral defenders on multiple quick reads on each play and adjust his position subtly from pressure to give time to resolve one of those peripheral defender angles to generate a completion. But, there are some where when they're working across the field that he just doesn't see well. Brosmer and his receivers, they have to be on the same page with routes over the middle. When the receiver should settle or continue his route, Brosmer seems to be, throwing the ball as if it's the opposite of what the receiver's going to do. And he's thrown interceptions because he expected one thing and the receiver did the other. Now, like most quarterbacks, his accuracy wanes a little bit under pressure, but Brosmer makes enough layered throws downfield and under pressure that it's premature, I think, to write him off as a player who fizzles with defenders in his face. Now, I don't think Max Brosmer is transcending a backup role, but I like the potential he could have long-term with his capacity, and maybe without the lows that some of the higher-profile options on the board might have for their game. So, for instance, Kyle McCord might have more starter upside, but he's got a really low downside. And Brosmer may not have as high of an upside to become a starter, but he could become a good backup. Now, Quinn Ewers out of Texas, his game's also in that line of demarcation between a player with a decent chance of developing into a starter and having a career as a backup. That recruiting profile of his career at Division I powerhouse Texas, and the solid fundamentals probably will earn Ewers draft capital that paves the way for him to get an opportunity to start during his rookie contract. But, his black zone vision, or his black zone wisdom isn't there. Being backed up inside his own 20, he tries for that extra read when he's already avoided 1 point of pressure in his own end zone, and his routes to that side of the field have been exhausted. It's time to throw the ball away, and he doesn't. Ewers has lapses when working through progressions. When edge pressures form and he misses the flat linebacker in position to cut off the target that he's waiting to cross into, and opening of the zone in the middle of the field. So he misses the linebacker in position to take that away. Ewers' issues are either common problems for NFL starters or they're areas where rookies lack mature game management. And Ewers' pocket management has some good techniques, but his conceptual feel probably could pose some limitations on his potential. He has an effective pocket clock, but it's got to speed up when a limited number of receivers are working to a heavily zoned side of the field, and he's vulnerable to blindside pressure. So he can stay in a tight pocket and make initial reads, but he's got to accelerate the clock accurately based on the compression of the area. He identifies unblocked edge pressure from the blindside post-snap, but he's got to improve his pre-snap identification of blindside corner blitzes. He can flush, he can roll, he can execute running and hitch-based climbs from pockets, and especially even from pockets that compress, and he can deliver with, pinpoint accuracy in the short and vertical range of the field, and he can be patient in a tight pocket. He can be economical in terms of working from backside edge pressure and deliver accurate throws in the intermediate range of the field too, and you can even layer it over a linebacker. So there's some really good stuff that you can say absolutely a backup, very possibly a starter. He's got some conceptual and technical control of his footwork, handles the pressure off a variety of drops, and he can preemptively avoid pressure with quick and early climbs, and it buys him time to slow down his pace and deliver a touch pass downfield. He's just got to get more advanced with his game if he's going to become a starter. Seth Henigan out of Memphis, he can deliver 46 yards from his pitch point to the near side boundary with pinpoint accuracy on the fade. Now he misses intermediate targets because he's throwing slightly behind receivers and who are facing tight trail coverage, and those defenders are in a position to knock the ball away. And Henigan's also has lapses where he leads receivers into coverage where Henigan can't protect the receiver from the oncoming hit. Now, he makes late climbs from blindside edge pressure. He can reduce the shoulder as the edge defender reaches for him. He can pull through the reach of defender, or he can sidestep pressure early on and then access a passing lane. And he climbs and flushes from edge pressure well. He's good at the spin and roll to the right or left. He has good timing of when to deliver it. Problem is he tries to fit balls into tight zones that can prove difficult for his prowess with pass placement under pressure, especially when trying to throw the ball over, say, an edge defender's rush. Now, he's got a range of 53 to 55 yards to the near side flat with catchable accuracy while taking a hit during his release. So he's got a decent enough arm to be a big play vertical threat. Shedeur Sanders of Colorado. He's an aspiring Geno Smith, Tua Tagovailoa style of passer, if you ask me. He can create when necessary, and I think that was all too necessary for him to do at Colorado. But I think he's really at his best as a distributor. Sanders has well-defined short drops, a good release, strong anticipation of the quick game. His pacing is kind of something that can be an asset for him when he's engineering an offense. But he's not as proficient with the quick game concepts where he's got to read sideline to sideline. He can be faster when identifying where to go with same side quick concepts like double slants. Sanders is prone to targeting intermediate routes, breaking back to him at the boundary when there's a defender squatting on the route over the top. They've got the high ground, and he ignores that fact. Sanders doesn't seem to understand the defender has the leverage advantage, especially when thrown from the far hash. He'll do this. So to compound the problem, Sanders takes the risk with these routes in his team's red zone. His black zone decision-making, especially early in contests, should also be far more conservative and minimize risk, and it doesn't. He's at his best right now at hitting short routes and the slow-developing downfield routes that work across the field. When factoring the quality of Sanders' drops and play-action game, I think he's got the promise to develop into a capable West Coast quarterback in a system like the Kubiak, Stefanski, McVay, and Shanahan schemes in the NFL. He's a patient passer with enough pocket skills to buy time and create both on and off script, but Sanders is not a dynamic mover in the Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson archetype. Think Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield as that typical wheelhouse for Sanders as an athlete. And Smith and Mayfield needed time to calibrate their athletic traits in the NFL. Expect Sanders to enter the league with some overconfidence in his athletic traits. But still, Sanders has shown promise as a player. He can make adjustments. He has done well when opposing coverage has gotten the better of him, and where the following week, if not the following half of the same game where he got taken advantage of, Sanders often learns his lessons, makes wiser decisions. So that's good. Tyler Shough, Louisville. The highlights are going to get many excited because Shough has some speed as a runner. He makes some impressive throws from a variety of arm slots, and he can do it on the move. If you squint hard enough, you're going to see some of the things that made Jay Cutler a compelling prospect early in his career from Shough. Right now, that potential is a projection more than reality. Shough's vertical and deep accuracy is catchable a lot more often than it is pinpoint. And his arm slots influence the dip in accuracy. So when forced to place air under the ball from an off-balanced platform on a deep target, Shough should be leading the target away from the deep safety, and he isn't doing that. Now, more important than his arm talent is the gaps with Shough's decision-making. He has to improve his recognition of early opportunities that the defense shows. These are opportunities that are superior to the predetermined decisions that Shough often makes. Shough can also be 1 to 2 steps late with executing the viable decision he identifies at the right time, but he lacks the confidence to trust with pressure arriving. This leads to throwing the ball in the middle of the field with an off-platform position and under pressure to a target that's just no longer open. So Shough's lateness as a decision maker can also lead him to taking sacks that he could have avoided, and he has to have heightened awareness and execution in game situations where he's in the opponent's territory late in the third quarter and down multiple scores. He shouldn't be taking sacks here. Now Shough has also thrown the ball away, but he's had situations where he should have had plays available to him, but he didn't. And part of it is that lack of confidence in getting the ball out. He could have hit the receiver 1 to 2 steps earlier, but his processor was a little slow, in the same way that it limited Alex Smith with his slow processor. So, Shough's got some effective reading skills, some wisdom to take sacks sometimes. He's got some good mechanics that are nice, but there's some coverage awareness and game management strengths and weaknesses with Shough's work, and the greatest concern might be one that's isolated to specific scenarios, but I think might be hidden to many who are touting him, and that's his pocket management. That's something you're going to learn more about in the RSP. Now, Will Howard. Will Howard has good foundation with his drops, play fakes, pump fakes, release mechanics. There's really only small tweaks needed for Howard to refine those parts of his game. As in his arm strength, it's an asset. He can stretch the field in the vertical game. He's got a good feel for when he can toss the ball and allow a wide open vertical option to trot under it without getting too fine with the placement. As a decision maker, I think his game's a bit of a mixed bag, but it's salvageable. He's got the confidence in his velocity to deliver the opposite boundary throw between a tight window of cover 2, but I think his confidence borders on arrogance, and it can translate that way in similar situations in the NFL, and he might need to revise his perceived limitations of what he can and can't attempt. I'd say that there's enough for Howard to develop into a capable backup if a team expects Howard's game to sing. He has some conceptual weakness to address, but one of the biggest is just losing track of defenders or ignoring their favorable leverage. Hunter Dekkers of Iowa State. Now, I didn't include him in the RSP. He'll probably be in the post-draft. But he's, around 6'3", 215 to 225-ish. He went to Iowa State and succeeded Brock Purdy there. He's a lefty. And I watched all his interceptions. I watched all his big play passes. I watched all his runs. And I watched a lot of his work against pressure and reading progressions. And what I saw was a quarterback who's mobile, who has good speed when he breaks into the open field. He's someone that can flip the field on occasion if things are right, but he's going to easily move the chains in a lot of scenarios. He has a very good feel and confidence in tight coverage to split coverage in the middle of the field and make some excellent throws that are daring and that are where they need to be in terms of placement to generate big plays, and he's not afraid to pull the trigger there. On the other end of the spectrum, he doesn't always see dropping defenders, trail coverage, defenders over the top, and doesn't read the leverage well enough and can often throw interceptions because he's not seeing those defenders and anticipating where those defenders can cut off routes. And so he has thrown a fair amount of interceptions for a college player with 1 year of starting under his belt. And he only had 1 year because of a gambling issue that occurred that got him kicked out of NCAA football, Division I football, after his first year at Iowa State. ESPN has an article on it that I'd recommend you check out. It'll give you an idea of the context and scope of it. He played at Iowa Western this year. He played at the Hula Bowl, seemed to do well at the Hula Bowl. He has NFL physical talents. He has the arm to be an NFL player. He has moments of accuracy that are compelling enough to say, I could see how if this guy gets the conceptual side of the game together, he could become a starter. But his decision making is ultimately either going to get better and help him become a compelling player, or it's going to not get better and he's going to wind up at best a backup if the team buys into that, he's a good professional, and I think that he probably will be. That's Hunter Dekkers of Iowa State. I would probably say, just from eyeballing it, he probably would have ranked somewhere between probably 7 to 10 on my board of quarterbacks, maybe a little more than that if his accuracy showed up really strong. But a player who has a viable would probably have a viable grade to eventually become a starter by his second contract. I think that's probably something that's possible with him if a team takes a chance on him enough and he can make a roster based on low draft capital, which can prove difficult for a lot of guys. But that's it. The RSP is going to be available for download on April 1st, maybe earlier, no guarantees. But in the meantime, you can pre-order your RSP, MountWaldman.com. Thanks again, and we'll be doing a lot of podcasts in the next month. Coming soon, me and JJ Zachariason, Christopher Harris, Sigmund Bloom on the couch. I think those are all this week, plus a few more. Thanks. Bye.